All right, Pitt finally had a decommitment out of the class of 2026 on Friday, July 4th, 2025. Dejon Moore, an offensive lineman from the state of Texas, declared his independence. He seceded from Pitt's commitment list, and Pitt's recruiting class declared his independence and promptly committed to Maryland, flipped his commitment to Maryland. He stayed independent for a very short amount of time, but made the flip from Pitt to Maryland. Offensive lineman out of Willis, Texas, Dejon Moore, a good offensive line recruit, one of four that Pitt has in the class, one of the higher-rated guys in the class, second highest-rated offensive line prospect in Pitt's 2026 recruiting class, is no longer in the class. What does it mean to lose Dejon Moore? What does it mean for Pitt's recruiting class? What does it mean for Pitt's offensive line recruiting? And what does it mean overall for this class going forward? Plus, is it something you should be getting too worked up about? Because inevitably there were replies on Twitter, well, you see, this is what happens. Everybody's losing faith in Pat Narduzzi and this and that. Settle down just a little bit. Because it's not necessarily that. It doesn't necessarily mean that all is failing or all hope is lost with regards to the direction of Pitt football and Pat Narduzzi, because the reality is these decommitments happen literally every year, and we'll talk about that as well. So let's talk about the decommitment news. We've spent so much time talking about commitment news. Let's talk a little decommitment news in the wake of Dejon Moore leaving Pitt's recruiting class on Independence Day. It's the Monday edition of the Morning Pitt here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's Monday. It's the Morning Pitt. It's youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. You see the website below. Don't click that. That's just a picture. But you can type those letters into your search bar, Panther-Lair.com, and that will take you to the website for the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Pitt football, Pitt basketball, Pitt recruiting, Pitt transfers, Pitt everything. We cover it at Panther-Lair.com, and we have message boards where you can hang out with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans all day, every day, talking about Pitt sports. Like, if you're a Pitt fan, the thing you probably like to do the most is watch Pitt sports, even if sometimes that's not all that much fun. But the second most favorite thing you probably have, or the thing you probably enjoy the second most in terms of being a Pitt fan, is talking to other Pitt fans. So that's what we give you an opportunity to do on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. Pitt fans are hanging out all day, every day. The most fanatical Pitt fans you are going to find. And I think it's the best online community of Pitt fans that exists. And so if you want to talk to other Pitt fans, you want to talk about Dejon Moore decommitting from Pitt, or what you think they need to do on the offensive line, or whether Kyle Lewis can repeat, all the things we talk about here on the Morning Pitt, you want to talk about these topics, engage with somebody else about these topics, you can go to the message boards at Panther-Lair.com and find lots of great conversation. Again, all day, every day on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, our YouTube channel here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We have all the Pitt video content you can possibly handle. We get these daily Morning Pitt videos Monday through Friday, a little bit of Pitt sports talk to get your day started. We've got, what else do we have? Weekly live show every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. We get together, me and Jim Hammett and you talk a little Pitt sports here every Wednesday night for an hour. We have post-game shows. We have interviews. We have press conferences, all kinds of Pitt video content, and it's right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So if you want to make sure you don't miss any of it, subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and then if you do that, you'll never miss it. And actually, if you subscribe, you can turn on notifications, and you get an alert sent to your phone every time we go live or post new content, so you make sure you don't miss any of our good Pitt video stuff here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So Dejon Moore made the announcement on Friday that he was decommitting. He was declaring his independence. He was finding certain truths that he held self-evident, and among those that he didn't want to go to Pitt, or more precisely that he wanted to go to Maryland. Dejon Moore decommitted, made the immediate flip. It wasn't even a decommitment and he waited a couple weeks, or a decommitment and he waited a couple hours. It was all in the same post on Twitter that he was not going to Pitt, he was going to Maryland. That's the plan, at least, is that he's going to Maryland. Now, he's an offensive tackle prospect from Willis, Texas, one of a bunch of guys in the class from Texas. Now there's one fewer. The class overall, I mean, you should start there, right? The recruiting class overall was at 21 prospects. There were 21 recruits in the class. Now it's down to 20.
There were four offensive linemen. Now that number is down to 3, and there were 5 recruits from the state of Texas. Now that number is down to 4. In terms of who they still have, Nick Howard, the offensive lineman from Pearland, Texas, was their highest rated offensive line recruit. Even with Dejon Moore in the class, he's still their highest rated offensive line recruit. Without Dejon Moore, he's the highest rated recruit they have from the state of Texas as well in the 24/7 Sports national rankings and the 24/7 Sports composite, which considers all the different ranking services across the internet. The industry generated 24/7 Sports composite. Nick Howard was the top offensive lineman in Pitt's class, and he still is. They also still have commitments from offensive tackle Mike Vanderwoord from St. Ignatius in Cleveland, Ohio. I think Mike Vanderwoord has a chance to be really, really good. He's big. He's athletic. He's still, I think, growing into his body a little bit. I think he'll fill out his frame but still be able to move really well and be a really good tackle prospect. And then John Curran, the offensive lineman, the interior lineman, guard or center from Pine Richland, who also committed on an official visit in June. All of these guys, all 4 of these guys that we're talking about, all 4 of these offensive linemen committed during their official visits in June, and 3 of them are still in the class. One, obviously, like we mentioned with Dejon Moore, is no longer in the class. It'll be interesting to see what Pitt does going forward with offensive linemen. We have different conversations on the message boards about how many offensive linemen you should take in any given year, how many offensive linemen should you have in a class. And I think there's a general sentiment that take as many as you can. I mean, offensive line is, along with quarterback, probably the hardest position to project at the next level, and I'm talking from high school to college, to figure out which of those guys are really going to hit, which of those guys are going to work out. I think it's really tough to project offensive linemen and quarterbacks for different reasons. But offensive linemen, you just don't know how the bodies are going to develop. You don't know how they're going to handle the film study. You don't know how they're going to handle going against college defensive linemen. I think it's really tough to project offensive linemen. And on top of that, you need 5 guys on the field at all times. And probably need to have 6, 7, 8 guys ready to play at all times. And so you've got this position or position group that's incredibly hard to project how that transition to college is going to go. And then it's also the position where you literally need the most number of players on the field of any position group. You need the most bodies. And so it makes sense to take a lot of offensive linemen every year. And they've had some small classes in recent years, but the last 2 classes were bigger. They took 4 offensive linemen in each of the last 2 recruiting classes, the classes 2024 and 2025. So those are the guys who are true freshmen right now in that 25 class, and then redshirt freshmen right now in that 24 class. They've lost one of those redshirt freshmen. Adham Abaraya transferred to, I think, Eastern Michigan this spring. So they've got 7 freshmen and redshirt freshmen, which is good. Those are solid numbers. Do they give you some wiggle room to take a smaller group this year? Maybe. But I think it was going to be set up pretty well if they took 4 offensive linemen in this class, and to really go 3 classes in a row with 4 offensive linemen, I think goes a long way in restocking the ranks. Now you've lost 1 from that class, that 2024 class. You've now lost 1 from the 2026 class, and where at one point it looked like you might have 12 offensive linemen over the course of 3 classes. Now you're down to 10 offensive linemen over the course of 3 classes, assuming everybody in the current class stays and nobody else transfers from the current roster. So your numbers took a little bit of a hit there. Ideally, particularly with what looks to be a pretty big recruiting class here with this 2026 class, ideally you'd get 4 offensive linemen, I think. They could get by with 3. What's going to be interesting is if they want to push for a 4th, I'm not really sure where it would come from. There was only one other offensive lineman who took an official visit to Pitt this in June, and that was Landry Brady. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. He was really high on Pitt, but he ended up committing to NC State. So 5 offensive linemen took official visits to Pitt. 3 out of the 5 are committed to Pitt. 1's committed to Maryland, and 1's committed to NC State. So, your options in terms of adding another offensive lineman, if you want to get back up to 4 in the class, you can work on one of those 2 guys, the kid going to NC State or the kid going to Maryland, and try to flip them, or look for a late bloomer. Because even if you look at the offer sheet, there's not a lot of legit offers still out there to offensive linemen who are uncommitted. you're pretty much right now. I think you're looking at one of two areas if you want to try to add a fourth offensive lineman to this class or get back up to 4 in this class. You're looking at one of two areas. One, you flip somebody, either Moore or Breedy, the guys who took official visits, or or flip somebody who didn't take an official visit but they're committed to another school, but maybe you've maintained contact there, or you look for a guy who really kind of emerges in his senior year. That's kind of it. If you want to get that fourth guy, it's not like they had 3 other offensive linemen who took official visits in June and they haven't committed anywhere and they're still kind of hanging out there that you can make a real big push for. If you're going to make a big push for someone, you're probably going to be making a push for someone who's committed to another school and you're trying to flip them, either now or later in the recruiting process. So those are your options if you want to take another offensive lineman. Now, somebody on the message board said, well, probably don't need 4 because you can always replenish through the transfer portal. And that's true. Like, that's always going to be a factor. You can always find players in the transfer portal. I think offensive linemen are tougher to find because if there's a good tackle out there, everybody's going to want him. Like, the best tackles go to the schools with the deepest pockets, right? The biggest NIL budgets and all of that. And so, you're going to have to dig in the depths. You're going to have to find Jeff Percy, who has played a lot at Michigan but not really been a starter, right? Or you're going to have to find Kendall Stanley, who's playing at Charlotte. Like, those are your options, like a power conference backup or an FCS starter. And even the FCS starters are getting big money to go to some of those bigger schools. So, like, it's all a challenge there to try to find those guys. So, there are some positions where I think you can probably rely on the portal or feel like, okay, we missed in this recruiting class, but the portal's a good option there. I think the portal is a pretty good option for quarterbacks, a better option than it is for offensive linemen, like, personally. Just because I think if there's a really good quarterback, the market's going to pay him crazy money and all that stuff. If Arch Manning or somebody goes into the portal, they're going to get, mucho bucks. But you can find an Eli Holstein. You know what I mean? You can find a Christian Veyer. It didn't work out with Veyer, but you could find a Christian Veyer. You could find a Julian Duggar. You could find a Nate Yarnell. You could find guys with experience who are decent players. I think it's a little bit tougher with offensive linemen because I think the bar for what counts as being good enough to merit a decent payday is probably a lot lower. And so you're always going to be fishing for offensive linemen in the portal. I think year after year, that's probably one position where if there's a good player available, you go get him. I think there will be very rare occasions where a coaching staff, particularly Pitt's coaching staff, will go into the offseason and say, we're good on the offensive line. We don't need a transfer. They're always going to want and probably need a transfer on the offensive line. But a school like Pitt is probably going to have its best success with homegrown linemen, like developing guys. And I say that knowing that, this year's offensive line is probably going to have 3 starters out of the transfer portal. But if they'd done a better job recruiting and home growing their offensive linemen last year, they probably don't get into some of the mess that they've gotten into. Again, they're always going to go for transfer offensive linemen, and they should. But I think you're still going to need to build that foundation and work hard and devote and dedicate a lot of recruiting spots and scholarship spots to high school prospects, high school offensive line prospects that you can bring in and try to develop and get on the field and sort of, like I say, build the foundation that way. It's probably always going to be a mix. Again, you need 5 on the field at all times. You need 8 ready to play at all times, if not more. So you're going to have some transfers in that mix. You're never going to get it all high school guys. But you'd like to do as much as you can in terms of building it through the high school ranks. So all that being said, like I said, they took 4 guys, in this current incoming freshman class. They took 4 the year before, but they've got 3 of them left. And that's probably the one other element too that we're talking about is we're trying to say, what numbers are enough, or how many numbers should they get, or what should they, you can sit back and say, all right, we took 4 every year for 3 years, so we're good. Well, right, that's 12 guys, but you're going to start losing them to transfers. Like, you're going to have transfers go. I mean, just this offseason, they had Terrence Enos, they had Terrence Moore, Adam Abaraya went. Was there another offensive lineman who transferred out? Trying to think here. I'll bring up my transfer tracker. Do they have any other O linemen? Terrence Moore. and Tarantino's, Maurice Schmorenzer and Adham Abaraya. So they had 4 offensive linemen transfer this offseason. And that's probably, you're going to have that. You're going to have guys, you're always going to lose transfers in a lot of positions. But I think offensive linemen, because, there's so many of them, and if they start getting deeper into their careers, like Enos and Moore in particular, and they get a sense that, maybe I'm not going to be a starter, or I'm not going to be where I want to be on the depth chart, then they're going to move. So, probably another reason to try to go out and load up in the recruiting classes. So I would guess the coaches will keep an eye out for a 4th offensive lineman in this class. Certainly, if they were to lose one of who's left, Nick Howard or Mike Vanderoord or John Coran, and I don't think they will. I think particularly Coran and Vanderoord they're really tight with. I think they'll be good there. Nick Howard is a long way away in Texas. You hope you can hold on to him. If they lose one of those guys, then absolutely they've got to go out and find someone else. They've got to put the full court press on flipping a top target from another school. I don't think you can just rely on a late bloomer who had a big senior season or something like that. I think you've got to get a legit guy, that you flip from a power conference school if you lose one of those other 3. As long as you can hold on to those other 3, I'm okay with finding that late bloomer, diamond in the rough. Maybe he's committed to Temple or someplace like that, and you get him late in the process, and that's all right. To fill out those numbers to get up to 4. But I don't think you can take less than 3. You probably should never take less than 3 offensive linemen. And if you go 3 every year, that's probably a little bit lighter than you would want to be or that you should be. I mean, you could get 3 in 1 year, but you need to surround that year with a couple of, 2 or 3 or 4 4-man classes on the offensive line. It's too important, and it's too much of a crapshoot. Not entirely a crapshoot, but a bit of a crapshoot on figuring out who's going to land, who's going to hit and who's going to be a miss. And so with that uncertainty, the difficulty in projecting the position, and then how many of them you need, you got to take numbers. You got to load up, unless you plan to go out next year, in December in the transfer portal and bring in like 3 redshirt freshmen, which is an option. It's not the worst way to approach it, because the one other thing about transfers, and this is important, and it's been brought up to me a few times when having these conversations, you get to like late November. Well, what would you rather do? You want to bring in a high school guy or bring in a guy who's been in college for a year? You bring in a guy who, like say you lose a decommitment in late November, right after Thanksgiving or something like that. Well, do you want to go scramble and find a guy that, to fill out the recruiting class in the next 2 weeks? Or do you want to take the month of December to find a guy who maybe has a year or 2 of college experience? He's been in a college strength program. He's been through what a week looks like as far as game week and prep and what a camp is and all those things. He's got all that experience. He's a year older, a year more developed, a year more mature. You just want to go out and find one of those guys when you've got a few weeks to sort of scour the ranks. And so it's a balancing act. For right now, maybe the best approach. I mean, number one, like I say, you got to hold on to Howard, Vanderoord, and Coran. And then beyond that, you just sort of keep your ear to the ground and keep your eyes open and see what develops. Maybe somebody emerges. Maybe you start getting a sense that an old target who committed elsewhere is a possibility for you again. So we'll see how the coaching staff decides to handle it going forward. But for now, they are down 1 offensive lineman in the class. They've got 3 still and still have 20 recruits in the class. The recruiting class dropped out of the top 30. So you'll have that. They're inching closer to that. What'll probably be their final landing spot, somewhere in the low 30s or high 30s, as it were, or low 40s, somewhere around there. All right, we ran out of time before we could get into discussion about the history of decommitments in June, but I think that'll be tomorrow's topic. I think we can get into that. We're writing about it today on Panther-Lair.com, so you can read some of the stuff. But it's interesting to look back over previous Junes at the recruits they got commitments from and how many they held on to. They held on the most, but every year with these June commitments from the June official visits, they lose some guys. It's inevitable. And here it is. Started off with Dejon Moore. All right. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I hope you had a happy and safe 4th of July weekend. Hopefully you went into the weekend with 10 fingers and you still got all 10
attached to your body, attached to your person in some way, shape, or form. Don't forget to check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, for all the Pitt sports news you can possibly handle. And like I say, like and subscribe, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I hope you have a great Monday, a great start to your week. We'll catch up with you tomorrow for a little more decommitment talk here on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.